Thank you for joining me for another episode of Get Ready. And this is a special episode of Get Ready because I get to interview my favorite person in the world. I but let me give you a little bio here first about my special guest, Christy Byrne Yates. Christy is the mother of two now adult children, two people that I know very well. She is an expert in navigating the challenges and opportunities in life, including living in the sandwich generation, those raising children who are also caring for an aging parent, special needs education, and parenting. She incorporates meditation, mindfulness practices, and emotional freedom techniques, EFT, something we know a little bit about here, into her work, along with other evidence based practices to support growth, goal achievement, and a pathway to living your best life now. In California, she is a licensed educational psychologist, a credentialed school psychologist, a coach, speaker, and author. She's also a contributing author in the Amazon bestseller Ignite Your Parenting, real life heartfelt stories to help parents find balanced joy in raising happy children. And now, the author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. And perhaps of all of her many accomplishments, of only which a few we've listed here, she's managed to stay married to me for 25 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Christy Byrne Yates.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I do deserve a medal for that. That's true.
Yes, you do. But, on top of that, in terms of that, as always, start off with some questions here. So the first question I'd like to put to you is, so among the many things that you've done, and talking about thriving in the sandwich generation, there's a lot of decision making that needs to be made. So I'm just curious, what would you say is the best decision that you've ever made in your life? Okay, I'll put you on the spot here. I don't usually do that to my guests.
Well, in terms of the sandwich generation, I did choose a really amazing partner, not knowing that I was going to be in the sandwich generation, but I did choose an amazing partner. And since the book we chose, and I want to thank you, Brad, for allowing me to co-opt our anniversary on April 27th to launch my book. So since we couldn't have a big party, we decided to launch a book. So yeah, thanks for that.
And so the book is called Building a Legacy of Love. So why don't you tell folks what you mean by that?
Sure. Well, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, Brad. We had a really tough time for about 6 or 7 years. Look, we had it really well, and we both know it. We had each other. We had amazing children. We had really great family around us. I love my brother and sister. They love me. Your family loves me. I love your family. Everybody loves it. It's a love fest, right?
Exactly.
But it's still really hard to see your parents age. And it's really hard when you have to start showing up to care for them in ways that you didn't imagine. And what's then really hard is having all that happen while you're raising your children. And there are times when you feel either squished, like you're in the middle of a sandwich. And for me, I've always said, and you've heard me say this, I felt pulled because I had to make choices sometimes between our kids and my parents sometimes. And it's really hard. So the legacy of love piece for me became really apparent when we were in the midst of doing all of this. And I'm working full time, PS, and in a demanding job. And I realized that at one point, I think, and maybe you can remember exactly when that was, but I remember just becoming aware that my parents had really done us a huge favor by taking care of so many things that made it so much easier for you and I to step up and be able to sort of just navigate. We kind of led the boat through the waters. But my parents had saved money. We didn't need to support them financially. They had written things down. They had a will and a trust. And they'd signed up for cremation services. They knew where they wanted to be buried. And so all of this was done so that you and I just could kind of show up to be there to help them have their best end of life, right? It was more of a, what's the end of their life going to be? And I realized what a legacy of love that they had given me in doing all of that when I started hearing from other people that they didn't have that, that they didn't know, and there's so many people that have had to care for their parents financially, and take them into their own homes, and maybe quit their job. Maybe actually, I know of so many people that actually had to sell their own home and go move in with their parents because there was no other choice. And we didn't have to make those choices. So there was that piece of legacy of love. And it made me think about, what are you and I doing to then transmit a legacy of love to our kids? And in those moments when when our kids were still living at home, and we were taking care of my mom and dad, it was learning to show up with them with as much grace and joy as I could, even amidst difficult times. And there were times when our kids were my best teacher and were saying, Mom, you're not being really nice to grandma right now, right? And things like that. And but it also kicked our butts a little bit, and we then started making sure we had things written down, and we started talking about things. And so, you know, our family, the four of us, our little nuclear bubble, we've talked really openly about a lot of these things. We've talked openly about end of life. We've talked to the kids about what we wanted, what they might want. They're adults now, so that's where I see legacy of love shows up in a lot of ways. But it's how do we care for the next generation as much as possible so that they don't have to make really, really difficult decisions at a crisis point, because those decisions never, I mean, no one dies on a schedule generally, right? And so things happen at the worst possible time, and then you're frazzled, and there's all kinds of things going on. And I mean, how many emergency room visits came, at a really convenient time? They just don't. And so you have to kind of know what you're facing a little bit. And so I wanted to write the book that I think I needed at some point. And so you know, you and I talked. I took a year off. I started writing it, and then we finished it. I finished it. I wish
Everything's
I
a
could
team
say.
accomplishment.
I
Come on.
mean,
Uh,
it is in a lot of ways. Yeah.
well, and I know one of your favorite images for this is sunsets. So as
Hmm.
you talk about it right there, it really hits me that it's setting things up such that as the sun sets, you're able to be present and enjoy it
Right.
as much as possible, to be able to,
Yeah.
put out some beach chairs and sit there and be present with your parents,
Yeah.
rather than being so distracted in so many things. It's like, oh, we're trying to deal with oh, the sun's already down. We
Right.
totally missed it.
Exactly. So, right. So really freeing yourself up to be present to the beauty, even though we think of the end of life. I mean, the thing is, we all know the answer to we all know the end of the story, right? We are all going to die and pass away, and we don't like to talk about it as a
Hey, hey,
society.
hey, this is a positive show, Christy. Come
I
on.
know. And yet,
Come on my show and say, you're all going to die.
and yet we
Yeah.
have to have those conversations, and not really about dying but living, right? Like, what are the living conversations we're going to have? Like, how do you want this to be? Mom, dad, here we are. What's most important to you right now in these times? Or even, and actually the best time to have those conversations are long before that happens, right? Is to say, when I get there, this is what's important to me, right? I don't want to be on, you and I have talked about this. I don't, how much medical intervention do I want? How much time do I want in a hospital? How much time, what are those things? And so talking about those things early is really important. And then the piece with our kids is, when they're old enough, and again, being age appropriate, having those conversations with your children. And then also, how do you show up in a joyful way with them? We were lucky that our kids knew my parents so well, and they're so lucky to have your parents now, and they're really close to both of them. And so so it's natural and normal that we can have fun conversations and good times together. And I know that they will want us to be as kind and generous to other people that we know in our lives as they get older. And how many times do our kids say to me, "Hey, mom," because for the audience, my mother had Alzheimer's, and there were times when we had the same conversation every 5 minutes. And if you love someone or know someone, friend or family member that has any form of dementia, it's it can be very hard and it's heartbreaking. And the other thing I came to realize was when I was getting short and frustrated with them, it was as much about my grief in seeing them in in that way, right? It was hard for me,
Right.
and I felt a loss that they weren't the same mom and dad that I'd had before. They were still my mom and dad 100%, but just that loss and that feeling of despair that this is where we were and this is and how hard it must be for them. Although I don't know, but I'm just saying it felt hard. And so the grief then, I mean, that's a clue, right? When you start feeling those feelings, something's going on. And this is where we have to take care of ourselves.
And that's one of the keys is, and you often talk about the book being a conversation starter, and it's
Yeah.
having that conversation so that folks are aware of, hey, you know what, this is going to be challenging, and that's going to shorten my fuse sometimes, and I want to be aware of that ahead of time, so I don't get caught unprepared and
Right.
lose it in a way that disrupts what might be called a legacy of love.
Right, right, right. Yeah. I mean, nothing's perfect. And
No,
I was never, it was tough, right? I mean, you were there. You were there. You remember it was hard.
you're always
Um,
perfect, sweetheart.
and it's hard to yeah, it's hard to go through that. And then but then always realizing I'm not just a caretaker for my parents, I'm raising my own children. And what kind of humans do we want to raise? And
Right.
I wanted to raise compassionate, loving children. And also, from a very pragmatic point of view, I'm training them on how to take care of me. So if I'm like showing them that, hey, at some point you can be a real jerk to your parents, I kind of don't want that. So I wanted to train them to, or teach them or inspire them to, be the loving, compassionate
Right.
human beings they really are.
Role modeling how to take care of an aging parent.
Right. Yeah. 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 And I got that role modeling from my parents, right? I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot. It's just wonderful that we could that we were able to just take care of them uh, in more loving ways that didn't include, draining our own bank accounts. And there's so many people, and we've seen this. The pandemic has really ripped the band-aid off of that, and we see so many people there. How many people are living in multi-age, multi-group families, grandchildren, great grandchildren, parents, kids, da, 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 and because that's what it takes to be able to live in the world this time. And we're really privileged, and we recognize that. And I recognize that my story isn't the same as many, many, many people's out there. It's still hard. So you have to be cognizant of the fact that there's other things that have to happen, but this isn't a policy book. It's definitely a book just about that concept of a legacy of love.
Right. And
So,
and as you said, there's no right answer for everybody,
right,
but getting prepared for that and recognizing, okay, as the sun is
right,
setting, there are going to be bills,
right,
there are going to be
right,
expenses,
right.
and being
Hmm.
prepared for that, and for folks to already be thinking ahead to, hey, I'm going to be in this place. And this is true of
Hmm.
anyone with aging parents, but particularly for those in the sandwich generation, where we have kids who
Right,
also have, it's like, okay, there are bills
right,
to pay for mom and dad, and college tuition, or whatever it is, depending on how old your kids are. Uh, and maybe, like so many people, you have your kids move back in with you, and there's
yeah,
other expenses there.
exactly.
Uh, yeah, I mean, it was an interesting thing because we moved up to Sacramento when the kids were small, and your parents were here to help us take
Yep.
care of them.
Exactly.
And then as it moved on, our kids were here to to help
And
us
they
take care of your
yeah,
parents.
and they really did, and it was really that was also beautiful to see. So, for all the heartache, there's also these moments of incredible grace and beauty, and I remember times when, I can just I'll get choked up, but I can just remember times the kids were with one of my parents, and, you and I watched them just be amazing human beings with them, so it was great.
And so in terms of building a legacy of love, it's again, we totally acknowledge how privileged we were in so many
Yeah,
ways. Uh, but for anyone, there are things to look at. There are conversations to have. There are resources out there
right.
to make it as smooth as possible.
Yeah,
There's
and
there's
it wa
no there's no way to make the passing of your parents a hey, that was the best thing that ever happened. I
right,
so love
right,
that. But to make
right.
it as graceful as possible.
Right, right. And I I when it started to happen, it was kind of a snowball, right? I mean, there were little things, right? First it was just trying to help with little things in their house and helping them learn how to use back when we were using DVDs, right? Helping them learn how to program their DVD or their television or something. And then, maybe help them learn how to use a cell phone, even though cell phones have been around forever. That wasn't what they did on a daily basis. So just different things. But then it became more and more and more and more and more. And when I looked for stuff to help me, because I'm kind of that data geek that wants to go out and find facts and help understand a how-to book. I found them, but they mostly talked about what to do for your parent, and they weren't really talking and a little bit about you taking care of yourself as a caregiver, but they didn't talk a whole lot about that whole big picture. And so I kept looking and looking around and websites and talking to people, and I really found that there were kind of two ways in which people kind of find frustration or some freedom, and that is so imagine a cross here, two lines intersecting, and the horizontal line being stress. Your stress level, is your stress level really low because you have enough support systems, or your stress level's really high because you have no stress, and you feel the burden of doing everything. And then the vertical axis being more like knowledge based, like what do you know how to do? I mean, you have to start learning how to do a whole lot of different things. I mean, I didn't financial things, housing things, medical things, all these different, stuff you have to learn about. And so there's that knowledge base. Maybe you have no knowledge of what to do, and then you go up to the higher level, and there's things you really need to, how to do things, right? So, but when once you kind of figure that out, so I don't know if you have it ready, but we could look
I
at the
I do.
legacy
I'm
of
going to
love
bring that up. This is the Christy Byrne Yates Legacy of Love framework.
framework. Um, but when we're really in a place of chaos, it's when we have very little support systems intact, right? We don't have any systems in place. And our family, our children, really learn that elder care is overwhelming. It's just horrible. Like life is just chaotic, right? You have a lot of stress and you don't know what to do, and you just feel chaotic. Um, Going across horizontally to a legacy of obligation, this might be where you have some support, right? But it's really complicated, and you just don't know what to do. And so maybe a lot of people are trying to help you out, and you just feel obligated all the time. You have some systems, but they're pretty incongruent. Sometimes they're working for you, sometimes they're not. And systems is a whole conversation. But like, what do you have intact in place to help you move along in your life every day? And then going up to legacy of resentment, if you have a lot of stress because no one's helping you out, or you feel it's like no one's helping you out. Um, but you know what you have to do, and that's even more frightening, right? Because then there's a lot of resentment of like, why do I have to do all this? Why
Right.
do I have to meet with the financial people? Why do I have to go to the bank? All these things. And there's this resentment. And see, our kids are learning all the time, whether we are intentionally instructing them or not. They are
Darn
picking
them.
this they are picking this up like little sponges. But this is how humans learn, right? We watch other people. And so
There are
my
times
thought
as
was,
parents we want to say, stop learning. No learning right now.
right? I
Erase,
mean,
erase. Strike
right.
that from the record.
But so, and I found found myself in all of these places, as you know, and you did too, and it was crazy. And then we finally, I think, got our groove every now and then, and it slips out very easily when you get stressed mostly. But the goal is really legacy of love. I think for me, it was a goal to have a legacy of love, that my kids could see that love equals compassion in action. There's an acceptance that this is what that people we love will die and leave us, and we'll still be okay. Um, and we have some consistent and congruent systems in place. And I say, build your team, find people you can trust to help with things. It might be, neighbors or your kids friends parents to help out with just travel from here and there and school obligations or things like that when you're super busy and can't do something. But it also might be finding the right people to talk to about money, about housing, about medical things, getting the paperwork signed so that you can talk to your parents' doctor and have some goals in mind for what's doing. And then all of this just requires a lot of conversation, and that those conversations are really hard. They're really hard, and not everybody's going to agree. And it's not always what I want or you want. It's what our parent wants for their end of life, and then we have to figure out how to make that happen. And anyway, so I felt like that framework for me was just my geeky way of kind of putting it down on paper. What does that mean, and how do you want to not feel obligated and chaotic and overwhelmed and in front of your kids or with your kids, because you want them to learn how to deal with a lot of these different things. So that's what it is.
And yeah, I know you're a big fan of Atul Gawande, who
Mhm.
talks a lot about the quality of life,
Right,
and it's finding out what the quality of life is for the parents, but it's also quality of life for everyone
right,
involved.
right, right. I mean, you and I had to determine what were we able to do, what were we willing to do, what were our limits, and those were important conversations that we had multiple times, right? Almost like every, sometimes it was weekly, daily, but there were big things, right? I mean, what would we do? A prime example was right before our son was graduating high school. My dad, a month or so before that, my dad had broken his hip, and he had to have surgery, and then he had to go to a nursing home, and he went to a nursing home. And I told the people there, hey, listen, on this date my son is graduating high school, so that can't be the day you release him, right? And I got a phone call at 4 o'clock the day before saying, and your dad's being released. And I'm panicked because we have people coming in from out of town. All kinds of things are happening. There's an event, and I don't have a place ready for my dad yet because he couldn't go back to the same place. Oh my gosh. And we had to really drop back and figure out what the heck are we going to do. And so, we made a choice based on what was important for our family, and that it was important for us, for our son, to have a graduation, and you and I both being able to be there, right? So we paid for, we used my parents' money because they had it, thank God, to pay for extra days at the nursing home, so that I didn't have to like shove and rush my dad somewhere. And so Friday we were able to be with our son and family, and same with Saturday on his day of graduation. And then Sunday we were moving dad
Back
into his
at
new
it.
place, right?
Yep.
So, but that we were again really privileged that we had the funds to do that. But other people might make a different choice, like, nope, your dad's we don't have the money, so we're going to do this. But
Right.
we were able to do that. And those are those times where you have to negotiate and think about what's most important right now for us. And for me, it was, I know my dad didn't want to be in the nursing home one more day, but that was that pull and that squeeze. And we made the choice to have our son have a high school graduation where his mom could be present. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, one thing you can always count on: life happens. So I
Right.
say hashtag life happens, tapping helps. But
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I am I'm so proud of you for writing this book and for stepping up and being of service. As I've told folks in a number of interviews, for anyone who has enjoyed my work, you can thank Christy because she taught me what a life of service is, because she was already doing that when I met her, and I was a not a service oriented person. So I am
Self-service. I don't know. You were like, I'm just teasing. Yeah.
anyhow. So I'm excited for this new chapter, book
Thank
reference,
you. Thank
new
you.
chapter in how you share your gifts and talents with the world. And thank you for coming on my show. I know it's really arm twisting. Come on, honey, be on my show.
No, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your fandom has been very generous to me, and I appreciate that so much. And I I definitely talk about EFT in the book, and hopefully we'll be putting it. Well, not hopefully, I will be putting out some um, tapping stuff with Brad, and perhaps on my own. I like to do it with Brad in the picture because he's so good at it. But
Well, Christy is
really,
a
that's.
certified EFT practitioner as well. So
I just don't want to compete with you, Brad. You
yeah,
know what I'm saying? I was, like I don't know. So yeah,
we'll
I
talk
really
about that
appreciate it.
later. Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway,
thank you. This has been fun, and I appreciate you doing this for me. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
my pleasure. My pleasure to share you with the world.